Good afternoon, Mark here from Excel, and a wine tasting, and a slightly hazardous one because for reasons I don't fully understand, I seem to be doing it this afternoon sitting next to Maggie, the Sprocker Spaniel. Thank you, Maggie. And this afternoon's tasting, we are looking at one of the wines that scores 96 points and tops a panel of Spanish Indigenous whites in the forthcoming May edition of Decanter 2021. Now, the three wines that top that panel are all distinctly different. And I'm just going to cover one of them here because I've only got the one of them to hand. And it's a pretty fascinating wine, and it is right in the block of wines I'm quite interested in. And we've often talked when we've done these white wine tastings in the past about this spectrum of whites. On one end, you get the crispy, zingy, crackling, all acidity, quite thin textured wines. So right at that end, something like Vinho Verde from Portugal. And maybe things like Albarino from Galicia, right at that end of the spectrum, a bit of Sauvignon Blanc, quite nearby. The other end of the spectrum, right down the other end, the heavy, oaked, malolactic fermented wines of, say, the Chardonnays from Napa, something like Ken Forrester's FMC, much more textured wines. Now, one of the difficulties, I think, for the winemaker is knowing where to put yourself on that spectrum. And personally, and I know it's true of quite a lot of customers, they like something that sits, somewhere in the middle. You want plenty of texture on the wine, plenty of mouthfeel, plenty of thickness. But the downside is you don't want to do that at the expense of losing the acidity, the refreshment and the zing of the wine. Personally, something like Viognier misses the mark for me because it's got the texture, it's down here, but it's just a little bit too thick and heavy, no acidity. Okay, people will tell me that Viognier is a wonderful grape. I know it is. I don't quite get it. Anyway, I digress. The wine today is a Godello from Bierzo in Galicia. It's made by Raul Perez. It's his Ultreia Godello, which is technically one of his entry-level wines. Now, this is a very fine winemaker. An entry-level wine from Raul Perez, no ordinary wine, that is for sure. It's a Godello. So, Godello is interesting in itself. For those of you that have this book, Oz Clarke's Grapes and Wines, it describes Godello as such. It must surely be in the running for the title of Spain's most interesting white grape, a title for which admittedly there are but few contenders, which I think is a little harsh. It shares the softly aromatic apricot texture of Albarino, but has a silkier texture, rather like good Viognier. Okay, has the texture of Viognier. But what it does tend to have is quite a lot more acidity. Well, this one is interesting, the Ultreia. It's pretty golden in the glass, and on the nose, you immediately know it's got a bit more going on. That is not your classic Galician white, which is quite thin in texture and all acidity. There is something there, and what that something is on the nose, definitely some oak. What's also there, I think, is a butteriness. Now, nowhere in the technical sheets for this wine can I get any mention of malolactic fermentation, which is, when you get that sort of smell, you think this has probably gone through a bit of malolactic. At least some of the wine has been put through that. So there is a butteriness there to it. But the oaky smell on that, really delicious, not heavy, not cloying, but there's a definite vanilla note to it, which, let's face it, you don't run into a lot in wines from northwestern Spain. On the palate, well, I know I prejudged this tasting a little bit, but it does that exact point of sitting at a very comfortable point on the spectrum. It's got zing, it's got acidity. Fruit-wise, quite apricotty. There's a little bit of tropical fruit there, and yet there's acidity that you would say was quite citric, maybe grapefruity. These are all quite ripe fruits going on in there. This is clearly quite a ripe year, but what makes that really lovely is the texture. Real mouthfeel, real grip. I can really feel that, sort of adhering to the sides of the cheeks in a way that I find personally really attractive. I think that's great. There is an oakiness, a butteriness to it, really tasty, lots of depth to it, and actually, even now, and what's that, 20 seconds, plenty of finish to it. Really, a really long wine, actually, really super. Now, I tried this last night with some deep fried squid and garlic, absolutely great, super texture to it, works really well, and yet has enough acidity to work with shellfish. Normally you think something that's got this butteriness to it, you wouldn't put this with sort of something as which normally needs as much acidity as, say, as squid. Absolutely lovely, really recommended. I haven't tried the other two of those top scorers yet. I will be, you'll see those fairly shortly, but if they're as good as this is great. Every bit 96 points, lovely, and I think about £17, I think we're pricing this at. Really tasty, love it, thanks.